Picture this. You are 7 months pregnant, bedridden, hooked to machines that monitor every heartbeat of the baby inside you. Your husband has not visited in 3 days. You tell yourself he is busy. You tell yourself he loves you.
I understand the
Then the
risk,
door
but
opens
we
at
have to
midnight.
use this evidence.
It is not a nurse. It is not your husband. It is the woman who has been sleeping with him for 4 months.
I'm here
She
now.
is drunk. She is angry. And she is holding a belt with a
We did
brass
it,
buckle,
Emily.
ready to
It's
beat you
finally
until you
over.
lose the baby. What do? You cannot run. You cannot fight. You can barely move. But here is what her husband did not know. Here is what the mistress did not expect. That helpless, pregnant woman, she was not crying, she was recording. This is the true story of Emily Carter, a woman who was beaten in her hospital bed while her husband watched and did nothing. A woman whose husband then tried to have her declared insane so he could take her baby. But Emily had a secret weapon. Not money, not connections, not a powerful family. She had documentation, she had patience, and she had a father whose next move left everyone in that hospital frozen. What happened next shocked an entire courtroom, and it will change the way you think about power forever. Stay with me until the end, because this story is not about revenge. It is about something far more powerful. It is about how one woman, with nothing but her phone and her paralegal brain, took down a millionaire, CEO, and his mistress without ever throwing a punch. This is the story of Emily Carter, and it starts in room 304. Lesson and value statement. What this story will teach you: this is not just entertainment. Hidden inside this story are 7 real, actionable lessons that could protect you or someone you love. You will learn why you should always screenshot before you confront. You will learn about one-party consent recording laws. You will learn why you should never sign anything under duress. And most importantly, you will learn that the greatest weapon against a narcissist is not anger or revenge. It is paperwork. Every woman deserves to know her rights. Every woman deserves to know how to protect herself. And every woman deserves to know that she is never as helpless as they want her to believe. Meaning of the story. The deeper message? This story is about more than a cheating husband and a violent mistress. It is about the power of community. Emily did not win alone. She won because she reached out, because she reconnected with the friend she had abandoned, because she accepted help from a nurse who had seen it all before, because she let her father back into her life after years of silence. It is about the power of documentation. In a world where powerful people can twist the truth, evidence is everything. Screenshots do not lie. Recordings do not forget. Paper trails do not disappear. And it is about the power of patience. Real justice is not fast. It is not dramatic. It is built one piece of evidence at a time, one witness at a time, one day at a time. Mark Carter thought money made him untouchable. Jessica Vance thought beauty made her invincible. They both forgot that there are forces in this world that operate by different rules, forces like a father's love, like female solidarity, like a woman who refuses to be silenced. Never underestimate a woman with a plan. They say a hospital room is where you are most vulnerable, stripped of your clothes, your dignity, your independence, hooked to machines that beep and whir, measuring your life in numbers on a screen. They say it is where strangers see you at your worst and you have no choice but to trust them. But what if I told you that is exactly where I became the most dangerous woman my husband ever met? My name is Emily Carter. I was 7 months pregnant, bedridden with severe preeclampsia, and about to lose everything I thought I had built. My marriage, my home, my future, maybe even my baby. But here's what my cheating husband did not know. I was not crying in that hospital bed. I was documenting. This is the story of how I went from victim to victor. How I discovered that the greatest weapon against a narcissist is not anger or revenge. It is paperwork. And it all started in room 304 of St. Jude Medical Center on a rainy Thursday night in March. The rhythmic whoosh and beep of the fetal monitor had become my lullaby, not a comforting one. More like the ticking of a bomb counting down to something I could not name. I had been in this room for 11 days. 11 days of lying flat, of nurses checking my blood pressure every 4 hours, of watching the ceiling tiles and counting the tiny holes in them. 642. That is how many holes were in the tile directly above my bed. I had counted them 17 times. My doctor, Dr. Henderson, had been clear when she admitted me. Severe preeclampsia. My blood pressure was dangerously high. The protein levels in my urine were off the charts. If I did not stay completely still, completely calm, both my baby and I could die. So I stayed still. I stayed calm. Or at least I pretended to. What I could not stay was blind. At 32 years old, I was supposed to be glowing. I was supposed to be at home, painting the nursery that soft sage green I had picked out from Pinterest. I was supposed to be folding tiny onesies and arguing with my husband about whether to name our daughter Sophia or Charlotte. Instead, I was alone, always alone. Mark had not visited in 3 days. His excuse was always the same: the merger, the investors, the quarterly reports. He was doing this for us, he said, for our future. I used to believe him. I used to believe everything he said. The door to my room opened, and I flinched, then relaxed, when I saw it was just Diane Murphy, my night shift nurse. She was a sturdy woman in her late 50s, with graying hair, pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that had seen everything twice. Diane walked over to check my IV with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She glanced at the notebook in my lap. "Honey," she said, "why are you writing down your own blood pressure? You think I cannot read numbers?" "Force of habit," I said. "I used to be a paralegal." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Paralegal? Girl, you married a CEO and you are doing your own paperwork? That man better be bringing you diamonds every day." I tried to smile. It felt like lifting weights with my face. "He has not visited in 3 days." Diane stopped fussing with the IV. Her hands went still. She looked at me with those seen everything eyes, and something in her expression shifted. It was recognition, understanding, maybe even pity. She had seen this before. I realized that in that moment. She had seen women like me before. Diane opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. She patted my hand instead. "Get some rest," she said. "I will be back in an hour to check on you." After she left, I stared at my phone on the bedside table. I had been avoiding it all day. Some part of me knew that if I looked, I would see something I did not want to see. But I looked anyway. We always look. There was a notification from Instagram. Mark Carter was tagged in a photo. My thumb hovered over the screen. Dr. Henderson had warned me about stress. "Do not look," a voice in my head pleaded. "Just go to sleep. Ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is survival." I looked. The photo was posted by a user named Jessica Vance Official. The location was tagged as the Sapphire Lounge. It had been posted 40 minutes ago. The picture was artsy, shot in low light. It showed 2 hands holding champagne flutes. On the man's wrist was a distinctive watch, a vintage Patek Philippe with a leather band. I stopped breathing. I had bought Mark that watch for our 3rd anniversary. I had saved for 6 months. I had the back engraved myself with words that now felt like a cruel joke. Time stands still with you. The caption read, "Celebrating big wins with the only man who can handle me. Hashtag power couple. Hashtag the future is bright." I knew who Jessica Vance was. She was the new operations consultant Mark had hired 4 months ago. She had legs that went on for miles, and a resume that read like a corporate climbing manual. I had met her once at the company Christmas party. She had looked at my baby bump with something between disgust and triumph. Like my pregnancy was an inconvenience she had already figured out how to eliminate. At that party, Mark had laughed at something she whispered and touched her arm. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that pregnancy hormones were making me crazy. But the human heart is an intuitive organ. It detects rot long before the brain is willing to acknowledge the stench. I did not cry. That surprised me. Maybe I had already used up all my tears in the lonely nights of the past few months. Maybe some part of me had already known. Instead, I screenshot the photo. The date, the time, the location tag, the caption, everything. Then I opened a secure cloud folder I had created 2 months ago. A folder I had told no one about. Inside were 47 other pieces of evidence. Credit card statements showing charges at jewelry stores and lingerie shops. Text messages I had recovered from the cloud backup Mark did not know existed. Photos from security cameras at his office that a sympathetic receptionist had slipped me. I was not naive. I had been suspicious for months, and I had been quietly, methodically gathering evidence. My paralegal brain had kicked in automatically. When you work in law, you learn one thing above all else. In any dispute, evidence is everything. Feelings do not matter. Suspicions do not matter. Only proof matters. Ladies, if you ever suspect something, screenshot first and confront later. Evidence disappears. Screenshots do not. I save the new photo to the folder. Evidence item number 48. Then I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, my hand resting protectively over my belly, where my daughter was doing her nightly gymnastics routine. I did not know it then, but in less than 2 hours, everything would change. The woman in that Instagram photo was about to walk through my hospital door. And she was not coming to celebrate. The door to room 304 clicked open at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I had glanced at the clock just seconds before, wondering if Diane was early for her rounds. She was not. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a perfume that was floral, cloying, aggressive. It had invaded my home in the past few months, clinging to Mark's shirts when he came home late. I had told myself he sat next to someone on the train. I had told myself it was his assistant's perfume. I had told myself 1,000 lies. Now that perfume filled my hospital room like poison gas. Jessica Vance stood in the doorway, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway behind her. She was wearing a beige trench coat, expensive and fashionable, but her appearance was disheveled. Her blonde hair was plastered to her forehead, wet from the rain that was hammering the windows. Her mascara had run, leaving dark tracks down her cheeks. But it was her eyes that terrified me. They were wide and bloodshot, swimming with a chaotic mix of alcohol and something far more dangerous: rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. "Well, well," Jessica said, her voice slurring slightly as she stepped inside. She let the door close behind her. The lock engaged with a sound that felt like a gunshot. Look at the little incubator. My instinct was to protect my stomach. I curled my knees up as best I could, pulling the thin hospital blanket higher. Every movement sent pain radiating through my swollen body. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "What are you doing here? Where is Mark?" She laughed. It was a jagged, ugly sound that bounced off the sterile walls. She walked to the foot of my bed, her expensive heels clicking ominously on the linoleum floor. Mark? She mocked his name like it was a joke. Mark is downstairs parking the car, or maybe he is calling his lawyer. I do not really care anymore. She looked at the fetal monitor, then at the IV drip snaking into my arm. Her eyes landed on my face with an expression that made my blood run cold. You need to leave, I said. My hand was already inching toward the nurse call button attached to the bed rail. Right now. Jessica moved with the speed of a striking snake. She grabbed my wrist, her manicured nails digging deep into my skin, and ripped the call button remote from the socket. She threw it across the room where it clattered uselessly into the corner. I am not done talking, she screamed, her composure shattering completely. Do you know what you did to me, Emily? Do you know what you cost us? I do not know what you are talking about, I gasped, trying to pull my hand free. Her grip was bruising. Please, you are hurting me. My blood pressure. The baby. Screw your blood pressure. Jessica leaned in close. The smell of vodka on her breath was overwhelming, mixing with that awful perfume into something that made my stomach turn. Mark was supposed to leave you 3 months ago, she hissed. We had a plan. He divorces the boring, frumpy housewife. I get to be the new Mrs. Carter. We merge our assets and take the company global. It was perfect, but then you had to go and get pregnant. Her grip tightened on my wrist until I cried out. You used this parasite inside you to trap him, she spat, her eyes flicking to my belly with hatred. You ruined everything. That is not true, I whispered, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. We wanted this baby. We planned this baby. He does not want it. Jessica released my wrist and stepped back, pacing the small room like a caged animal. Her movements were erratic, unstable. I realized with growing horror that she was not just drunk. She was unhinged. Something had broken inside her tonight. He tried to break up with me, she continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. We were at the Sapphire celebrating. Everything was perfect. And then he gets a call from the hospital saying, you are critical, and he gets all guilty. He said he could not leave you while you are sick. He tried to dump me, Emily. Me! She whirled to face me, and what I saw in her eyes was not just anger anymore. It was madness. Please, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even as my heart pounded so hard, it might trigger a seizure. Jessica, we can talk about this. Just let me call someone. A nurse. Anyone. No! She stopped pacing. She looked down at herself, at the thick leather belt cinched around her trench coat. It was a designer piece with a large, solid brass buckle shaped like 2 interlocking letters. Slowly, deliberately, Jessica's hands went to the buckle. Mark is weak, she muttered, almost to herself. Her eyes had glazed over. He will not finish it. He will not get rid of the problem. So I have to do it for him. I watched in horror as she undid the belt and pulled it free from the loops of her coat. What are you doing? My voice rose to a panic. Jessica, stop! She doubled the belt over in her hand. The leather snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. If you lose the baby, Jessica whispered, a terrifyingly calm smile spreading across her lips, Mark will have no reason to stay. He will be free. We will be free. No! I screamed. Help! Somebody help me! But even as I screamed, my hand slid under my pillow, because beneath that pillow was my phone. And as Jessica raised the belt, I pressed record. Voice recording laws vary by state. In ours, only one party needs to consent to record a conversation. I was that party. It is called one-party consent. Look up your state's laws, ladies. Knowledge is protection. Jessica swung the belt. The first blow missed my body and hit the metal railing of the bed with a deafening clang that sparked against the steel. I screamed again, a primal sound that should have brought every nurse on the floor running. But the maternity ward was busy with 2 active deliveries, and the storm outside was thundering against the windows, masking my cries. "Shut up!" Jessica roared. She swung again. This time, her aim was true. The thick leather strap lashed across my raised forearm as I tried to shield my stomach. The brass buckle bit into my skin, tearing a gash that immediately welled with blood. The pain was blinding. Hot. Electric. "Stop!" I begged, curling into a protective ball around my belly. "Please, I am pregnant. That is the point." Jessica was consumed now by a frenzy of jealousy and madness. She struck again. The belt hit my thigh. Again, my shoulder. I felt each blow like a lightning strike, but I did not uncurl. I would not let her reach my baby. Through the haze of pain and terror, my mind kept working. Recording time, 4 minutes, 23 seconds. She just confessed to planning this. She just admitted Mark knew about their affair. "Keep recording. Keep documenting. You ruined my life," Jessica screamed, bringing the belt down again and again. I felt a blow connect with my side, dangerously close to my abdomen. The pain was excruciating, but the terror was worse. I felt a cramping sensation, a deep, ominous tightening in my womb. "Please," I whimpered, my vision blurring. "Take him. Take Mark. Just leave my baby alone." Jessica raised the belt high for another blow, aiming directly at my stomach. "It is too late for bargaining, you trash." The door flew open. What the hell is going on in here? It was not Mark. It was a young male nurse named Tyler, barely out of nursing school, holding a tray of medications for a different patient. He took one look at the scene and dropped the tray. Glass vials shattered on the floor. Tyler lunged forward without hesitation. Jessica turned wild-eyed and swung the belt at him, screaming to stay back, but Tyler tackled her. They crashed into the medical cart, sending instruments flying. Jessica scratched and clawed, shrieking obscenities, but Tyler managed to pin her arms to the floor. "Security!" he yelled into the hallway. "Code Violet in 304. Security!" Through my tears, through my pain, through my terror, I made sure my phone was still recording. 6 minutes, 41 seconds. Enough evidence to put her away, or so I thought. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. 2 security guards burst through the door, followed quickly by Dr. Henderson in her white coat and Diane Murphy, who had been at the nurse's station when the code was called. They pulled Jessica off the floor where Tyler had her pinned. She was kicking and spitting, still screaming. "You cannot touch me. Do you know who I am? I will sue this entire hospital. Mark! Mark, tell them!" And that was when Mark Carter walked in. My husband stood in the doorway, wearing a soaked raincoat, his hair dripping from the storm outside. His eyes swept the room, first to Jessica, restrained by guards, mascara smeared across her face like war paint, then to me, huddled in the corner of the hospital bed, bleeding from my arm, sobbing uncontrollably. The fetal monitor was screaming a warning. My blood pressure numbers on the screen had turned red. For one heartbeat, I thought he would come to me. I thought he would rush to my side, hold my hand, demand to know what happened to his pregnant wife. I thought, despite everything, that some part of the man I married still existed. I was wrong. Mark looked at the security guards. He straightened his tie. His face shifted into a mask I recognized. It was his business face, his damage control face, the face he wore when dealing with unhappy investors or bad press. "Officer," Mark said, his voice smooth and measured, "please be gentle with Miss Vance. She has been under tremendous stress lately." He turned to Dr. Henderson with that same cold, professional demeanor. "I apologize for the disturbance. Miss Vance is a valued colleague who has been struggling with some personal issues. I am sure we can sort this all out quietly without involving the authorities." Then he turned to me. He did not rush to my side. He did not check my wounds. He did not ask if the baby was okay. He looked at me with cold annoyance, like I was a problem to be managed. "Emily," he sighed, "the way you might sigh at a dog who had peed on the carpet. Why did you have to provoke her? You know she has a temper. Now look at this mess you have caused." The room went silent, except for the screaming monitors. Even Jessica stopped struggling. Even the security guards looked uncomfortable. "I provoked her?" I whispered. The words came out broken, barely audible. "Mark, she attacked me. She beat me with a belt. She tried to kill our baby." Mark pinched the bridge of his nose like he was getting a headache. "We will discuss this later," he said dismissively. He turned back to Dr. Henderson. "I want this kept quiet. No police involvement. I will pay for a private room where Miss Vance can calm down. My wife is clearly hysterical from the pregnancy hormones. Let us not ruin anyone's reputation tonight over a simple misunderstanding." He was protecting her. He was protecting the woman who had just beaten his pregnant wife with a belt. Something inside me died in that moment. Not my body, not my spirit, but the last fragile thread of love I had held for this man. It did not snap with anger. It simply dissolved, like smoke in the rain. Dr. Henderson was staring at Mark with barely concealed disgust. She glanced at me, at the blood seeping through the bandage Tyler had hastily applied to my arm, at the welts already turning purple on my exposed skin. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice tight, "your wife has been assaulted. Hospital policy requires us to file a report with the police." I said no police. Mark's tone sharpened. "Do you know how much money Carter Logistics donates to this hospital every year? I am on the board of directors. I will handle this privately." The threat hung in the air. "Give me what I want, or I will make your life difficult." I watched Dr. Henderson's face. I watched her weigh her career against her conscience. I had seen that calculation before. I had made that calculation myself, 1,000 times, choosing to stay silent rather than risk Mark's anger. Diane Murphy stepped forward. She positioned herself between Mark and my bed like a shield. "The patient needs immediate care," Diane said firmly. "Everyone who is not medical personnel needs to leave this room right now." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but something in Diane's expression made him reconsider. This was a woman who had seen worse men than him, a woman who was not impressed by money or status. "Fine," Mark said. He adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit I recognized. "I will be in the waiting room. Emily, we will talk about this when you have calmed down." He turned and walked out without looking back, without once asking if I was okay, without once acknowledging the woman they were still physically restraining. The security guards dragged Jessica out after him. She had gone quiet now, her face pale with the realization that her plan had failed. As she passed my bed, she looked at me with pure hatred. "This is not over," she hissed. The door closed behind them. Dr. Henderson immediately began checking my vitals while Diane elevated my feet and adjusted my IV. The fetal monitor was still beeping rapidly, but as I forced myself to breathe, the numbers slowly began to stabilize. "The baby is okay," Dr. Henderson said, after an agonizing minute. "Heartbeat is strong, no signs of placental distress. But Emily, your blood pressure is dangerously high. I need you to stay as calm as possible. Stay calm. After what just happened, stay calm." I almost laughed. Diane leaned close to me, pretending to adjust my pillow. She spoke quietly, just for my ears. "I saw everything, honey." She squeezed my hand. "Everything." I nodded weakly, then whispered back. "So did my phone." Diane's eyes widened slightly. Then she gave me a small, grim smile. Smart girl. An hour later, after my vitals had stabilized and the immediate crisis had passed, a man in a sharp gray suit entered my room. He introduced himself as Reynolds, the hospital's risk management attorney, He placed a clipboard on my bedside table with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Mrs. Carter," Reynolds said, his voice professionally sympathetic, "we understand there was an altercation tonight, a misunderstanding between family members. Everyone is very concerned about your well-being and the stress this must be causing." "It was not a misunderstanding," I said. My voice was raspy from screaming. "She attacked me with a belt. My husband watched it happen." Reynolds nodded like he was agreeing with me while not agreeing at all. "Of course, I understand you are upset, but police reports are messy things, Mrs. Carter. They drag on for months. They cause stress, which is the last thing your baby needs right now." He clicked a gold pin and slid a document toward me. "Your husband has generously offered to not press charges against you for initiating the conflict. All you need to do is sign this non-disclosure agreement, and Mark has agreed to cover the cost of the best neonatal care available for the remainder of your pregnancy." I stared at him. "Against me?" Reynolds smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Witnesses say you were shouting. Miss Vance has a bruise on her wrist from where you grabbed her. In situations like this, it often becomes a matter of," she said. "Very difficult to prove anything." He leaned forward, dropping his voice. "However, if you choose not to sign, I should warn you that litigation can be extremely expensive, and Mark has indicated that if you are deemed mentally unstable, he will petition for full custody of your child once she is born." The threat was clear. It was, sign the paper or lose your baby. Mark had thought of everything. He had money, connections, and apparently the hospital administration in his pocket. He was trying to erase the assault as if it never happened. "Get out," I said. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "I will leave the papers here. You have 1 hour to reconsider." He checked his watch and walked out. I was alone. My phone sat on the table. Its screen cracked from when Jessica had thrown the remote earlier, but it still worked. The recording had saved successfully to my secure cloud folder before anyone could take the phone from me. I picked it up with trembling hands. I scrolled past Mark's contact without hesitation. I scrolled past the numbers of friends who were all wives of Mark's business partners, women who would never take my side against a man who controlled their husbands' careers. I found the name I was looking for. It was not my father, not yet. It was Rachel Bennett, my best friend since college. The woman I had abandoned when Mark insisted she was beneath us. The family law attorney who had tried to warn me about Mark 5 years ago. I had not spoken to her in 3 years. The last time we talked, she had begged me to open my eyes. I had called her jealous and hung up. I pressed call. It rang twice. "Hello?" Rachel's voice was guarded, confused. It was nearly 1 in the morning. "Rachel." My voice broke. I started to sob, the dam finally breaking. "It is Emily. Emily Carter." A long pause. "Emily? What is wrong? What happened?" "I know I disappeared when I married him," I choked out. "I know I was wrong. I know I should have listened to you. But Rachel, I need help. I am in the hospital. His mistress attacked me. She beat me with a belt while I was bedridden. And Mark, he is protecting her. He is trying to make me sign papers. They want to take my baby." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear Rachel breathing. Then her voice came back, sharp and focused, professional. "Do not sign anything. Do you hear me? Not a single document. I will not. Do you have evidence? Is so verreit? Anything at all?" I almost smiled through my tears. "Rachel, I have a recording of the entire attack. I have screenshots. I have financial records. I have been collecting evidence for 2 months." This time the pause was different. Impressed. "Send me everything," Rachel said. "Right now, tonight. And Emily, yes, I have been waiting 3 years for you to call. Never sign anything under duress. Ever. I need time to review this with my own attorney is a complete sentence. Use it. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I had a lawyer. I had evidence. I had a plan. Rachel Bennett arrived at the hospital at 7 a.m. the next morning, looking exactly like I remembered her. Sharp blazer, sharper eyes, the kind of confident posture that made opposing counsel nervous. She had driven 2 hours through the storm to get here. She walked past Mark without acknowledging him. He was sitting in the waiting room, looking exhausted and irritated, his phone glued to his ear as he dealt with what I assumed was damage control. Rachel reviewed my evidence folder while sitting in the chair beside my bed. She listened to the recording with earbuds, her expression growing darker with each minute. "This is good," she said when it ended. "This is really good, Emily. She clearly states she planned to harm you. She admits Mark knew about the affair, and we have her on assault with a deadly weapon. So it is enough to press charges? More than enough. This recording alone could put her away for years." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 12 hours. Okay, so what do we do? First, we get a restraining order against both of them. Then we file for divorce on grounds of adultery and emotional abuse. With this evidence, you will get full custody. Mark's lawyers will try to drag it out, but he cannot win this. She squeezed my hand. "You did everything right, Emily. You documented. You protected yourself. You reached out for help instead of suffering alone. I am proud of you." Those words nearly broke me. I am proud of you. When was the last time anyone had said that to me? I spent the next 24 hours letting myself believe the worst was over. Rachel filed the emergency motions. A restraining order was granted against Jessica, who had been released from hospital custody after Mark paid some kind of fine or made some kind of deal that I was not privy to. Mark had tried to visit me twice. Both times, hospital security turned him away at my request. Diane Murphy had personally ensured that my room was off limits to anyone not on my approved visitor list. For one brief shining day, I thought I was winning. Then Rachel called. Emily, her voice was careful, in a way that immediately made my stomach drop. "I need you to stay calm." What happened? The recording. "We had our tech team verify the file, and there is a problem. The audio is corrupted." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean, corrupted?" The first part is clear. Her entering the room, her initial threats. But right before she starts confessing about Mark's involvement, the audio cuts out. It comes back in pieces, but there are gaps. Critical gaps. We have her attacking you, but nothing that explicitly connects Mark to the affair or proves he knew about her plan. I could not breathe. The monitors beside my bed started beeping faster. "But I heard her say it," I whispered. "She said Mark was supposed to leave me 3 months ago. She said they had a plan." "I know, and you can testify to that. But without the recording, as corroboration, it becomes your word against hers. And against his." The room was spinning. All that careful documentation, all that preparation, and the one piece of evidence that mattered most was useless. What do we do? "We keep building," Rachel said firmly. "This is a setback, not a defeat. We still have the financial records, the Instagram photos, the pattern of behavior. We still have Diane as a witness. It will just take longer." I nodded, even though she could not see me. I tried to steady my breathing. Okay, we keep building." 12 hours later, Mark made his move. I was half asleep when Diane came into my room with a look on her face that told me something was very wrong. "Honey," she said gently, "your husband's lawyers just filed an emergency motion." My mouth went dry. "What kind of motion?" She handed me a document. I read it with growing horror. It was an emergency petition for psychological evaluation of the mother. Mark's legal team was arguing that my behavior during the incident showed signs of mental instability, that my hysterical claims about Miss Vance were evidence of pregnancy-induced psychosis, that for the safety of the unborn child, the court should evaluate whether Emily Carter was mentally fit to be a mother. He was trying to have me declared insane. He was trying to take my baby before she was even born. I am not sure what happened next. I remember Diane calling for Dr. Henderson. I remember the monitors screaming. I remember the ceiling tiles blurring and spinning as they injected something into my IV to bring my blood pressure down. I remember thinking, he has more money. He has more lawyers. He has connections I do not even know about. How do I fight someone who can rewrite reality? The next few days blurred together. Rachel worked around the clock, filing counter motions, gathering additional evidence. Diane checked on me every hour, bringing me food I could not eat and hope I could barely hold. But I could see the worry in their eyes. Mark had hired the most expensive family law firm in the city. His lawyers were filing motion after motion, drowning Rachel in paperwork, delaying hearings, running out the clock. His strategy was obvious. Keep Emily stressed, keep her blood pressure high. Maybe the pregnancy complications would solve his problem for him. The hearing for Mark's custody petition was scheduled for the following week. Rachel was cautiously optimistic. The judge in family court is fair, she told me. She does not like men who use money to bully their wives. I think we can win this. And for one fragile moment, I let myself believe her. We won. The emergency custody motion was denied. The judge saw through Mark's manipulation. She noted that there was no evidence of mental instability, that the hospital's own records showed I had been the victim of an assault, and that Mark's request appeared to be an attempt to intimidate a vulnerable pregnant woman. I watched Mark's face fall via video call from my hospital bed. His confident smirk crumbled into disbelief. His lawyers looked embarrassed. For the first time in 8 years, he did not get what he wanted. "Did you see his face?" Rachel said afterward, unable to hide her satisfaction. "That is the look of a man who just realized he is not invincible." I allowed myself a small smile. Is it over? Not yet. But we are winning, Emily. We are definitely winning. I closed my eyes that night feeling something I had almost forgotten. Hope. It lasted exactly 18 hours. Mark's lawyer requested an emergency continuance. She had new evidence, she claimed, evidence that would fundamentally change the nature of the custody dispute. The judge granted it. The new hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. What evidence? I asked Rachel. What could he possibly have? I do not know, Rachel admitted, but my contact at the courthouse said his lawyers looked confident. Too confident. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake, one hand on my belly, feeling my daughter kick restlessly as if she sensed my fear. The next morning, I found out what Mark had discovered. He had found my father. I had not spoken to my father in 5 years. Arthur Sterling was a retired mechanic who lived in a small town in Montana. He was not wealthy or powerful or connected. He was just a quiet man who fixed cars and minded his own business. Mark had always hated him, called him a grease-stained loser, a redneck embarrassment, an anchor that would drag us down. When we got married, Mark insisted I cut ties with my father. For our image, he said, for our future. And I, young and foolish, and desperately in love, had obeyed. The last time I saw my father, Mark had screamed at him to get off our property, called him unfit to be around a CEO's family. My father had looked at me with those quiet, patient eyes, waiting for me to say something. I had said nothing. I had let him walk away. That was my greatest shame. Greater than believing Mark's lies. Greater than ignoring the red flags. I had abandoned the only person who had ever loved me unconditionally, and now Mark was using him as a weapon. The document arrived via email. Rachel called me immediately. "Emily," she said carefully, "I need to prepare you for something." "What is it?" "Your father, Arthur Sterling. Mark's investigators found something in his past." The world tilted. What did they find? 22 years ago, your father was convicted of aggravated assault. He served 3 years in state prison. I could not process the words. "That is impossible. My father is the gentlest man I know. He has never even raised his voice at me." "People change," Rachel said softly, "but that does not matter to the court. What matters is that Mark is going to argue that you come from a violent family, that your father's criminal history makes him an unfit influence on a child, that the maternal grandfather, being a convicted felon, is evidence that full custody should go to Mark." I shook my head, even though she could not see me. "I did not know. I never knew. I believe you. But Emily, this is serious. Judges take family history into account in custody decisions. This complicates everything." The hearing was brutal. I watched via video call as Mark's lawyer presented the documentation. Arthur Sterling's mugshot from 22 years ago, his prison records, the details of his assault conviction. "Your Honor," the lawyer said with theatrical concern, "we are not suggesting that Mrs. Carter herself is violent, but consider the environment in which she was raised. A father with a felony conviction for violence, a family history of aggression. Is this the influence we want around an innocent child?" Rachel objected. She argued that my father's past was irrelevant to my fitness as a mother. She pointed out that he had served his time, been a model citizen for 2 decades, and had no subsequent criminal history. But I could see the judge's face. The seed of doubt had been planted. The hearing was continued again. More time for both sides to prepare arguments. After the call ended, I stared at the ceiling of my hospital room, the one with 642 holes in the tile above my bed. I had been so careful, so methodical. I had gathered evidence, hired a lawyer, played by the rules, and Mark had still found a way to hurt me. But it was not over yet. Because while I was reeling from the revelation about my father, Jessica Vance was making her own move. The article appeared online the next day. It was posted to a popular gossip site that specialized in corporate scandals and celebrity drama. CEO's pregnant wife allegedly attacked consultant. Claims of abuse may be fabricated. Jessica had gone to the media. She had spun a story in which she was the victim. In her version, I had attacked her first. The belt was self-defense. She was the one who was beaten, not me. She showed off bruises on her wrists where Tyler had restrained her. She cried on camera about how scared she had been. She painted me as a jealous, unstable woman who was trying to destroy her husband's career. The comments were brutal. Gold-digging wife, baby trap. False accusations ruin lives. Another crazy woman playing victim. I watched my name trend on social media. Thousands of people who did not know me were judging my entire life based on lies. My blood pressure spiked so high that Dr. Henderson had to sedate me. When I woke up, Diane was sitting beside my bed. Her face was grim. "How bad is it?" I asked. She did not sugarcoat it. "Pretty bad, honey. The story is everywhere." I closed my eyes. "So this is how it ends. He destroys my reputation. He takes my baby. And everyone believes I was the villain." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised me. "Do you know why I became a nurse?" I opened my eyes. "What?" She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. "I was 19, married to my high school sweetheart. He hit me on our honeymoon. By the time I was 21, I had 2 broken ribs and a story about how clumsy I was." She met my eyes. Nobody believed me either, until one night, a nurse at the emergency room looked at my chart and said, "Honey, You do not have to lie to me. That nurse saved my life. She stood up and smoothed her scrubs. You are not alone, Emily. You have people who believe you, and that is more powerful than any news article. She was right. I was not alone. I had Rachel. I had Diane. I had Dr. Henderson, who was documenting everything with medical precision. But I was still missing one piece. The one person I had thrown away. That night, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. Hello? His voice was gruff, deep, like gravel grinding together. Dad? My voice cracked. Daddy, please. I am so sorry. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then the sound of something metallic being set down. A wrench, maybe, or a coffee mug. Emmy? His voice had changed. Shifted from the guarded tone of a man who did not recognize the number to something softer, something that made my throat tighten. Emmy, where are you? What happened? I am at St. Jude Medical Center, I choked out. Room 304. It is a long story, Dad. I messed up. I messed up so badly. Is the baby alive? His question surprised me. Not are you okay or what is wrong, but is the baby alive? Like a soldier receiving a mission briefing. Priorities first. Yes. Yes, she is okay. But Dad, Mark found out about your past, about the conviction. He is using it against me in the custody case. Silence. Then a heavy exhale. I knew this day would come, he said quietly. I hoped it would not. But I knew. Why did you not tell me? The question came out more wounded than I intended. All these years, all my life, why did you keep it a secret? Because I spent 20 years trying to be someone you could be proud of. His voice was thick with emotion. Something I had never heard from my stoic, steady father. I was a different man, Emmy. Young, angry. I got into a fight at a bar. A man said something about your mother, God rest her soul, and I snapped. Beat him badly enough that he spent a month in the hospital. I deserved every day I spent in prison. He paused. When I got out, you were 4 years old. You had just learned to ride a bike. You looked at me like I was a hero, and I swore I would never let that man, the one who could lose control like that, anywhere near you again. I wiped my eyes. Mark is saying you are dangerous, that you would be a bad influence on my daughter. Mark is a fool. My father's voice hardened. He has no idea what dangerous actually looks like. And he has no idea that real strength is not about violence. It is about choosing peace when violence would be easier. Then his tone shifted again. Practical. Focused. Emmy, I am 40 minutes out. Do not sign anything. Do not talk to anyone. If anyone touches you, if anyone even looks at you wrong, you tell them Arthur Sterling is coming. He paused. And tell them to pray. The line went dead. 45 minutes later, there was a knock on my hospital room door. Arthur Sterling did not look like a former convict. He looked like exactly what he was. A 62-year-old, retired mechanic with calloused hands, a worn flannel shirt, and eyes that held more kindness than any CEO I had ever met. He was carrying a cardboard box. Emmy. He set the box on the visitor chair and came to my bedside. His rough hand touched my cheek with an impossible gentleness. Look at you. Look at my girl. I started crying again. I seem to have done a lot of that lately. Daddy, I am so sorry. I am sorry I let him push you away. I am sorry I did not call. I am sorry for everything. Hey. He pulled up a chair and sat beside me, taking my hand in both of his. You did not push me away. You took a detour. That is all. You are finding your way back. We sat in silence for a moment. The machines beeped. Rain continued to patter against the window. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me. How do I fight him, Dad? He has money. He has lawyers. He has the media. And now he has your past to use against me. I do not know how to win. My father reached for the cardboard box. He opened it and pulled out a stack of papers and photographs. Do you know what is in here? I shook my head. Everything, he said. Every birthday card you ever made me. Every school photo. Every letter you wrote when you went to summer camp. Report cards. Art projects. The certificate from your spelling bee in 4th grade. He spread them out on the bed. Decades of my life, documented in crayon and construction paper and fading photographs. And this, he said, pulling out a manila envelope from the bottom of the box. This is something Mark does not know about. I opened the envelope. Inside were receipts, bank statements, payment records. I do not understand, I said. That is the money I sent to help pay for your paralegal certification, my father said. Mark told you he paid for it, right? That it was his investment in your future? I nodded slowly. He said it was a wedding gift. It was not. I paid for half of it. Sent the money directly to the school because Mark refused to take my calls. He cashed the checks and told you he did it himself. My hands trembled as I flipped through the records. Thousands of dollars, years of payments, all while Mark was telling me my father was too poor to help us, too useless to matter. Why? I whispered. Why did you not tell me? Because you were happy, or you seemed happy. And I thought maybe I was wrong about him. I thought maybe he really was taking care of you. He shook his head. I should have fought harder. I should have made you listen. You could not have, I said. I would not have believed you. I was too far gone. We sat with that truth for a moment. The years lost, the lies believed, the relationships sacrificed on the altar of Mark Carter's ego. Then my father straightened up. His expression shifted into something harder, more resolute. Emmy, he said, I did not come here to cry about the past. I came here to help you build a future. Now, let me tell you what we are going to do. He leaned forward. That recording you have, the corrupted one, it might be damaged, but there are specialists who can recover data from damaged files. Your friend Rachel needs to hire one. I blinked. How do you know about the recording? He smiled slightly. I talked to Rachel on my way here. She is impressive, that one. Glad you called her, he continued. Second, Mark's company has been under federal investigation for 6 months. Pension fund irregularities. I know, because I submitted the initial tip to the FBI. My jaw dropped. What? How? Do you remember that Christmas dinner 3 years ago when Mark had too much to drink and started bragging about his creative accounting to some investor friend over the phone? He did not realize I was in the next room. I wrote down everything he said and mailed it to the federal prosecutor's office the next week. I stared at him. You have been building a case against Mark for 3 years? I have been protecting you for 3 years in the only way I knew how. He took my hand. Emmy, I do not have money or lawyers or connections, but I have patience. I have documentation. And I have the truth. That is enough to take down any man, no matter how powerful he thinks he is. A tear slid down my cheek. Why did you not just tell me what he was? Would you have believed me? The answer was obvious. No, I would not have. Not 3 years ago. Not even 1 year ago. My father nodded. You had to see it for yourself. And now you have. So let us finish what you started. He was not a knight in shining armor. He did not show up with a biker gang or a briefcase full of cash. He showed up with a cardboard box of memories and a manila envelope of truth. And somehow, that was exactly what I needed. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my life. I had given birth to Sophia in the middle of it all. A beautiful, healthy baby girl who screamed her way into the world at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday and immediately wrapped every person in that delivery room around her tiny finger. I was discharged from the hospital 5 days later, still recovering from the C-section they had to perform when my blood pressure spiked during labor. My father rented a small apartment near the hospital, so I would have somewhere safe to stay. It was not fancy. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled faintly of the previous tenant's cooking, and a view of a parking lot. But it was mine, no mark, no cameras, no one watching my every move. Rachel Bennett came over every day with legal updates and takeout containers. Diane Murphy stopped by after her shifts to check on Sophia and bring casseroles she claimed were leftovers, but I suspected she made specifically for me. Slowly, painstakingly, we built our case. The audio specialist Rachel hired was able to recover 80% of the corrupted recording. It was not perfect, but it was enough. Jessica's voice clearly stating that Mark was supposed to leave me. Her admission that they had a plan. The sound of the belt striking flesh. It was damning. But we needed more. Mark's lawyers were still fighting, still delaying, still trying to bury us in paperwork. The federal investigation was moving slowly, as federal investigations do. So we found witnesses. It started with a woman named Catherine. She contacted Rachel through a mutual friend, someone who had seen the news coverage and remembered a similar story from years ago. Catherine had been Mark's first wife. I did not even know he had been married before. He had told me I was his first love, his only love. Another lie in an ocean of them. Catherine came to my apartment on a rainy afternoon. She was in her mid-40s, well-dressed, composed, but her hands trembled when she held her coffee cup. He did the same thing to me, she said, isolated me from my family, made me think I was crazy, controlled every aspect of my life. Why did you not come forward before? I did not have evidence. She shook her head, bitterly. When I tried to divorce him, he destroyed me, took everything, made everyone think I was unstable. I moved across the country to get away from him, changed my name, started over. She looked at me with fierce determination. But you have evidence, and you have me. I will testify. I will tell the court exactly who Mark Carter really is. Catherine was not the only one. Once word got out that someone was finally standing up to Mark, other women came forward. 3 former employees of Carter Logistics who had been harassed, intimidated, or forced to sign non-disclosure agreements when they complained. Margaret Sullivan, a veteran legal aid attorney that Diane had connected me with, helped coordinate their testimonies. She was in her 60s with steel gray hair and the demeanor of someone who had spent 40 years fighting for people. The system had failed. Your friend Rachel is excellent, Margaret told me, but I handle warfare. Together, we are going to take this man apart. The media narrative began to shift. The journalist who had published Jessica's lies started receiving messages from other women with similar stories. She investigated, verified, and eventually published a new article. The pattern: how one CEO allegedly terrorized multiple women. Catherine was quoted, anonymously at first, then by name when she decided she was done hiding. The 3 employees shared their experiences. The pattern of behavior, isolation, manipulation, financial control became impossible to ignore. Overnight, the comments changed. Believe women. He had us all fooled. I am so sorry I doubted her. Mark's stock price dropped 12%. 3 board members quietly resigned. The federal investigation accelerated. And through it all, I did something I had forgotten how to do. I took care of myself. I nursed my daughter. I ate meals that Diane brought. I slept when Sophia slept. I accepted help instead of insisting I could handle everything alone. One night, my father was sitting in the living room, holding Sophia while I rested on the couch. She had finally fallen asleep after an hour of fussing. You are doing good, Emmy, he said quietly. I know it does not feel like it, but you are doing good. I watched him with my daughter, this man who had made terrible mistakes, who had spent 3 years in prison, who had clawed his way back to decency one day at a time. This man who had never stopped loving me, even when I stopped calling. Dad, I said, I am sorry I ever believed him over you. He shook his head. You believed a man who told you what you wanted to hear. That is not a crime. That is being human. Sophia stirred in his arms. He rocked her gently, and she settled. You know what I learned in prison? He asked. I learned that the men who survive are not the strongest or the meanest. They are the ones who know how to wait, who know that time is the great equalizer. He looked at me. Mark Carter thinks he is powerful because he can sign a check. He forgot to ask where the power actually comes from. It comes from people, from trust, from loyalty that cannot be bought, and he has burned all of his. I smiled despite my exhaustion. When did you become so philosophical? Prison libraries have a lot of books, he said with a shrug. Not much else to do. Sophia made a small sound, and we both froze, waiting to see if she would wake. She did not. My father continued, his voice soft. Emmy, you do not need me to save you. You never did. I raised you to be strong enough to save yourself. All I can do is remind you of that when you forget. I felt tears prick my eyes. But you did save me. You and Rachel and Diane and Margaret and Catherine. I could not have done this alone. That is not being saved, he said. That is having a community. There is a difference. He was right. There was a difference. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late May. I wore a simple navy dress that Rachel had helped me pick out. Professional but not flashy, confident but not aggressive. Every detail mattered in these settings, she had explained. Judges notice everything. Sophia stayed with Diane for the day. It was the first time I had been away from her for more than an hour, and every cell in my body ached to hold her. But I could not bring a baby to a courtroom, and I could not afford to be distracted. The hearing took place in the family court downtown. It was smaller than I expected, less dramatic than television had led me to believe, just a wood-paneled room with fluorescent lights and rows of uncomfortable chairs. Mark was already there when I arrived. He looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, his designer suit hanging loosely on his frame. The confidence that had once been so attractive now seemed brittle, like a shell that could crack at any moment. His right hand was bandaged. I later learned that he had punched a wall in his office when the federal charges were announced. Jessica was not present. She was in county jail awaiting trial for aggravated assault. The judge had revoked her bail after she violated her restraining order by trying to contact me through a third party. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Rachel presented our evidence methodically, the restored recording, the financial documents showing Mark's infidelity and hidden assets, the testimony from Catherine and the former employees, the medical records documenting my injuries from the attack. Dr. Henderson testified via video link about my condition during and after the assault, about the stress-induced complications, about the danger to both me and my unborn child. Diane testified in person. She was a powerful witness, calm and credible, with decades of nursing experience lending weight to her observations. She described what she had seen that night: Jessica's rage, Mark's dismissal, my terror and desperation. Then it was time for Mark's defense. His lawyers tried everything. They attacked the recording as manipulated evidence. They questioned Catherine's credibility. They painted me as a vindictive wife who was exaggerating a minor altercation. But halfway through their presentation, something remarkable happened. The judge called a recess. When we returned, she announced that new information had been submitted to the court. "Mr. Carter," she said, looking directly at Mark, "the federal prosecutor's office has informed me that you have been formally indicted on 12 counts of wire fraud and pension fund theft. Given the severity of these charges, I am required to consider them in my determination of your fitness as a custodial parent." Mark's face went gray. His lawyers scrambled to object, to request a continuance, to delay the inevitable. But the judge was having none of it. "I have seen enough," she said. "I am prepared to make my ruling." The room went silent. "In the matter of Carter versus Carter," the judge began, "having reviewed all evidence presented, I find the following. First, that Emily Carter was the victim of a violent assault by Jessica Vance, an associate of the respondent, Mark Carter. Second, that Mark Carter failed to protect his pregnant wife from said assault and actively attempted to conceal evidence of the attack. Third, that Mark Carter has demonstrated a pattern of controlling and manipulative behavior throughout the marriage, including isolating the petitioner from her family and support network. Fourth, that the respondent's pending federal charges indicate a fundamental lack of moral fitness." She removed her glasses and looked at Mark directly. "Mr. Carter, you represent everything that is wrong with the family court system. You believed that money and power could allow you to abuse your wife, gaslight her, and then steal her child. You were wrong." She turned to me. "Mrs. Carter, I am awarding you full sole custody of your daughter, Sophia. The respondent will have no visitation rights until and unless he completes a court-approved parenting course and psychiatric evaluation. Child support is ordered at the maximum guideline amount based on his documented income. Alimony is awarded for a period of 10 years. I could not breathe. Beside me, Rachel grabbed my hand and squeezed. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "a permanent restraining order is hereby issued against both Mark Carter and Jessica Vance. Neither may approach or contact the petitioner or minor child within 500 feet. She gathered her papers. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down. I sat frozen in my seat as the courtroom began to empty. Rachel was saying something to me, probably congratulations, but I could not hear her over the roaring in my ears. Mark stood across the aisle, staring at me. His face was a mask of disbelief and rage. For a moment, I thought he might say something. Apologize, maybe, or threaten, or try one last manipulation. Instead, he lunged. It happened so fast. One moment, he was standing by the defense table. The next, he was rushing toward me, screaming incoherently, his bandaged hand raised. "You ruined me," he screamed. "You and your criminal father. You destroyed everything." The bailiffs tackled him before he got within 10 feet of me. They pinned him to the ground as he continued to thrash and scream obscenities. More security poured into the courtroom. I did not move. I did not flinch. I just watched the man I had loved for 8 years be dragged away in handcuffs, adding assault in a courtroom to his growing list of charges. When he was gone, Rachel turned to me with wide eyes. "Emily, are you okay?" I looked at her. Took a deep breath, let it out slowly. "I am free," I said. "That is all that matters." The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and the quiet, overwhelming work of being a single mother. Jessica Vance went to trial in September. She tried to plead not guilty, claiming self-defense, but the restored recording destroyed her case. The jury heard her confess to planning the attack. They heard her admit that Mark knew about their affair. They heard the sound of the belt striking me as I begged her to stop. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Aggravated assault, assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, criminal conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in a state correctional facility. She would be eligible for parole in 5. I watched her face as the verdict was read. The shock, the disbelief, the moment when reality finally broke through the delusion she had built around herself. She looked at me across the courtroom, not with hatred anymore, just with emptiness. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not triumph, just a vague relief that it was over. Mark's federal trial was a longer affair. It dragged on through the fall and into the winter as prosecutors methodically dismantled his financial empire. The evidence was overwhelming. Pension fund theft, wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. He had been stealing from his own employees for years, using the money to fund his lifestyle with Jessica. 12 years. That was his sentence. 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8. Carter Logistics collapsed within weeks of the verdict. The board dissolved. The assets were sold off to pay creditors. The employees, who had been loyal to Mark, found new jobs. The ones he had mistreated testified against him. I learned later that several of them had received threatening messages from Mark even after his conviction. He was obsessed with revenge, convinced that I was the architect of his downfall. He was wrong, of course. He was the architect of his own downfall. I just documented it. My father came to both trials. He sat in the gallery every day, quiet and watchful, a steady presence in the chaos. After Mark's sentencing, we went to a diner near the courthouse. Just the two of us, like when I was a kid and he would take me for pancakes after church. "How do you feel?" he asked, sliding a cup of coffee across the table. I thought about it. "I feel like I can finally breathe." He nodded. "That is how it is supposed to feel." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The diner was mostly empty, just a few other customers scattered in the booths. "Dad," I said finally, "I need to tell you something." "What is that?" "I read the court transcripts from your case, the one from 22 years ago." His expression did not change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Shame, maybe. Or fear? I continued. "You did not just beat up some random guy in a bar fight. You nearly killed a man who was trying to assault a woman in the parking lot. You stopped a rape, Dad, and you went to prison for it because the man you beat up was a state senator's son, and the woman was too scared to testify." He was quiet for a long time. "Where did you find that?" "Rachel has good investigators. The records were sealed. But the woman? She is alive. She remembers what you did. She wanted me to thank you." My father stared at his coffee. His hands, scarred and calloused from decades of honest work, trembled slightly. "I was not a hero," he said finally. "I lost control. I did not stop hitting him even after he was down. That is not justice. That is just rage, maybe. But you saved her life. And you never told anyone, not even me. Why? Because it does not matter why you do a violent thing. What matters is that you did it." He looked up at me. "I spent 20 years learning that lesson. Learning that real strength is not about what you can destroy. It is about what you can build." He reached across the table and took my hand. "You are everything I tried to become, Emmy. You fought back with evidence and witnesses and lawyers, not fists. That is real power." I squeezed his hand. "I learned from you." "No," he shook his head. "You learned despite me, and I am so proud of you for that." Later that night, I received an unexpected piece of news. The anonymous tip that had launched the federal investigation into Carter Logistics 3 years ago, the one my father had submitted after overhearing Mark's drunken confession, it had finally been acknowledged by the prosecutor's office. Not publicly, of course. These things are always kept quiet. But Rachel had contacts, and contacts had contacts, The tip had included specific account numbers, transaction dates, and company codes that the FBI would never have found on their own. It was not just a vague suggestion of wrongdoing, it was a roadmap. My father, the convicted felon, the supposed violent criminal, had spent 3 years quietly, legally, methodically, building a case against the man who was hurting his daughter. He never threw punch. He threw paperwork. 20 years of reformation taught him that real power is not violence. It is patience. 2 years later. Montana in autumn is the most beautiful place on earth. At least that is what I have decided. The aspen trees turn gold against the evergreen pines, and the air is so clean it almost hurts to breathe. I moved here 6 months after the trials ended, bought a small farmhouse outside a town where nobody knew my name or my story, started a paralegal consulting firm that helps other women navigate high-conflict divorces. It is not glamorous work. It does not make me rich. But every time I help someone document their evidence, or understand their rights, or find the courage to leave, I feel like I am paying forward the help I received. My office wall is covered with thank you cards from former clients. Photos of women who got out, letters from mothers who kept their children, a poster that Rachel gave me as a housewarming gift. It says, "Document everything." Sophia is 2 years old now. She has my eyes and her father's nothing. She is entirely herself, a tiny hurricane of opinions and energy and joy. She thinks the chickens in our backyard are her personal pets. She calls my father Pop Pop and follows him around like a shadow whenever he visits, which is often. He moved to a cabin about 20 minutes away. Said he was tired of Montana winters alone. I suspect he just wanted to be close to his granddaughter. On a crisp Saturday morning in October, I am sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching my father teach Sophia how to check the oil in his old pickup truck. "You have to be gentle," he is saying, guiding her tiny hands. "See this stick? We pull it out slow, like this." "Like this, Pop Pop?" "Exactly like that." "Good job, sweetheart." Sophia beams with pride. She is covered in grease and absolutely thrilled about it. Rachel visits once a month. She drives up from the city, stays for the weekend, and we drink wine and talk about everything and nothing. We started a legal workshop together, a monthly seminar called Know Your Rights, Surviving High-Conflict Divorce. We do it over video now, reaching women all over the country. Diane retired from nursing last year. She writes a blog about medical advocacy for abuse survivors, helping people navigate hospital systems and document their injuries properly. She sends me emails with subject lines like, "Guess which hospital finally updated their protocol and I met another nurse who is going to change the world." Catherine and I have lunch once a year. She is remarried now to a quiet man who teaches high school history and looks at her like she hung the moon. She still testifies occasionally when Rachel or Margaret needs a witness who can speak to Mark's pattern of behavior. Margaret Sullivan is still fighting, still taking cases for women who cannot afford attorneys, still training the next generation of legal aid warriors. She turned 70 this year and shows no signs of slowing down. I think about Mark sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. He writes me letters from prison. Once a year, around Sophia's birthday, they're always the same, begging for money, begging for a photo of his daughter, begging for forgiveness he has never actually earned. I do not burn the letters. I do not read them either. I just put them in a box in the attic, unopened. They are ghosts, and ghosts do not get to haunt me anymore. The last news I heard about Jessica was that she tried to sell her story from prison, a tell-all memoir about her affair with Mark Carter. No publisher wanted it. Turns out, attacking a pregnant woman is not relatable content, Sophia runs up to the porch, her hands outstretched. Mama, look, I did the oil thing. I see that, baby girl. You are so smart. Pop-Pop says, broken things deserve a second chance. I glance at my father, who is wiping his hands on a rag and smiling softly. Pop-Pop is right, I say. They do. Sophia climbs into my lap, smearing grease on my sweater. I do not care. Mama, she says seriously, when I grow up, I want to fix cars like Pop-Pop. I kiss the top of her head. You can be anything you want, sweetheart. Anything at all. Later that evening, after Sophia is asleep and the dishes are done and the house is quiet, I stand on the porch and watch the stars come out. People ask me sometimes how I survived. They want to know if I had some secret weapon, some hidden resource, some powerful connection that saved me. I did. It was called community. It was called documentation. It was called refusing to disappear. Mark thought my silence was weakness. It was evidence collection. Jessica thought I was helpless. I was building a case. My father taught me something that no amount of money can buy: how to endure, how to plan, how to fight without losing yourself. So here's my advice to you, wherever you are, whoever is making you feel small. Screenshot everything, find your people, know your rights, and never ever underestimate a woman with a plan. They wanted me broken. I became unbreakable. I am sitting in my home office, reviewing case files for a new client, when an email notification pops up on my screen. It is from Rachel. The subject line reads, "You need to see this." I click the link. It is a news article. Federal prisoner, Mark Carter denied early release. Victim's testimony, cited in decision. I read through the article. Apparently, Mark had petitioned for early release based on good behavior. The parole board had reviewed his case and denied it unanimously, citing the lasting impact of his crimes on multiple victims. At the bottom of the article, there is a quote from one of his former employees. "He took everything from us," she said. "Our retirement savings, our trust, our faith in the system. But the women who came forward gave us something back. They showed us that fighting back is possible. That documentation matters. That community matters." I close the article and stare at the screen for a moment. Then I smile. Not because Mark is still in prison, not because I won and he lost, but because somewhere out there, other women are reading this same article. And maybe, just maybe, it is giving them the courage to document their own evidence, to reach out to their own estranged friends, to believe that they deserve better. Sophia bursts into my office, now 5 years old and even more of a hurricane than before. "Mama, Pop-Pop is here. He brought the tractor." "A tractor?" My father appears in the doorway, looking slightly sheepish. "It is a small tractor," he says. "Dad, she needed a project," he protests. "Every kid needs a project." I shake my head, but I am laughing. My life is not what I planned. It is not what I imagined when I was a naive 24-year-old marrying a charming CEO. It is better. It is real. And it is mine. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own strength or the strength of someone you know, I have a small request. Drop a comment below and tell me, did Emily do the right thing? Did Arthur go too far? Or did Mark and Jessica get exactly what they deserved? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what you think. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who might be going through something similar, please share this video with them. Sometimes knowing that others have survived is the first step toward finding your own way out. And if you are new here, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Every week, we bring you stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who refuse to stay victims. Stories about karma, justice, and the power of never giving up. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time means everything to me. Closing statement. This content was carefully researched, crafted, and manually edited by our team. Every detail, every lesson, every piece of advice was thoughtfully included to bring real meaning and value to your life. We do not just tell stories, we build experiences designed to entertain, educate, and empower. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for listening. And remember, screenshot everything. Find your people, know your rights, and never, ever underestimate yourself. See you in the next story.